All right, everyone get ready, because today we are going deep into time management. We've got excerpts and articles all about making every minute count. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's a topic we all struggle with, right? But I think this deep dive will offer some interesting and new perspectives, so I'm excited too.
I think so too. Okay, so our main source is time management, proven techniques for making every minute count. We'll also bring in some stats about workplace stress, from Neosh and the Marlin Company. But we're not going to talk about just the theory. We're going to get into actionable stuff you can actually use, strategies, and mindset shifts.
Sounds good. So where do we start?
Okay, let's tackle this idea that we're always crunched for time. The book says, even with all this technology that should be making things easier, people feel more rushed than ever. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. Well, one really interesting point the book makes is that, according to a study, Americans actually have more free time now than they did in the past. Yeah, from a study way back in 1999. So if we have more free time, logically, we should be less stressed, right? But that's not really the reality for a lot of us.
Yeah, it's true. It's like our perception of time doesn't line up with reality.
Yeah, exactly.
So one possible explanation that the book gives is that, the way we spend our free time might be part of the problem. Think about it. Like hours spent scrolling on social media or watching TV, binge watching, might not actually feel all that restful or productive.
Yeah, it's passive, not really active.
Yeah.
Right. And I think when we spend our downtime in ways that don't actually recharge us, we go back to work feeling depleted. And then that feeds right back into that feeling of being rushed all the time.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about this concept of busy work versus actual productivity, those tasks that keep us running around like crazy but don't actually, move us closer to our goals. Have you ever fallen into the busy work trap?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think we all have at some point. The book even has this image, it's kind of cynical but relatable, of middle management creating mountains out of molehills just to look busy. But that's not really productivity.
No, it's not. It's just spinning your wheels. And I think that's the sneaky thing about busy work. We can convince ourselves that we're getting things done when really we're just avoiding the more challenging but ultimately more important tasks.
Right, exactly. And the book says we need to be ruthless about cutting out busy work, but it also says we should ask ourselves why we might be looking for busy work in the first place. Is it fear of failure or not being clear about a task? We need to think about the reasons.
Okay, so we've talked about the time crunch and the busy work, but what about those huge to-do lists that never seem to get shorter no matter how much we do?
Yeah.
The book calls this the to-do list from hell. I know that feeling well. What strategies does the book give to get out of that to-do list? I don't know what to call it. Purgatory.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, one of the things they say is to actually limit what goes on your list. Like, instead of trying to put down every single thing you could possibly do, they say focus on just a few must-do items for each day.
So just be super selective.
Yeah, exactly. It's like choosing the activities that will make the biggest impact, And another tip is to break free from email. Like, we tend to check our inbox first thing, but that can set us up to just react all day instead of being proactive.
Oh my gosh, I am so guilty of that. It's like email becomes this black hole of time and energy.
I know, right?
So what are some better ways to prioritize them?
Well, they suggest thinking about when you have the most energy and scheduling your hardest tasks for those times. For some people, that might be early morning. For others, it might be later. It's about working with your natural rhythms.
Oh, matching the task to your, mental state. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do you make sure that those must-do items actually get done and don't get pushed aside by less important things?
Well, the authors really like to schedule blocks of time for the most important tasks, just like you would for a meeting, It's about making space in your day instead of just hoping you'll find the time.
That's a really good tip. I love it. It's
Yeah.
really concrete. But what about when the demands on our time come from other people? How do we say no when we're already so busy?
The art of saying no, right?
Mm.
It's hard for a lot of people, and the book talks about some of the reasons why, like fear of disappointing others or feeling indispensable or not wanting to seem rude. Those are all reasons people don't say no. What about you? Do you find it hard to say no?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Especially when it's people I care about. I've definitely been in situations where I said yes to things I didn't have time for, and it always ended up backfiring. I just felt stressed and resentful, and I couldn't do my best for anything I had committed to.
Yeah, I get that. Well, the book has this really helpful way to think about it. Instead of focusing on disappointing the other person, think about the cost of saying yes. What are you giving up? Time with your family, Time for yourself. Time to work on a project that's important to you.
That's such a good point. It's about realizing the trade-offs.
Right.
And sometimes saying no is actually self-care, not being selfish.
Exactly. And they say that saying no doesn't have to be mean or anything. There are ways to say no nicely.
Okay, so give us the inside scoop. What are some of those strategies for saying no gracefully?
One thing they say is to just be upfront about what you're already doing and be honest about whether you can take on anything new. Instead of just saying no, you could say something like, I'm already really busy, so I wouldn't be able to give this the attention it needs.
That sounds way better than just saying no.
Yeah, and if you really want to help but you can't, right now you could offer to do something else. You could say, I can't do that right now, but I could do this other thing in a couple of weeks. Or you could suggest someone else who might be better for the task.
Those are really helpful, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about something a little different now. Let's talk about downtime. Those little bits of time we have, like waiting for a meeting to start, stuck in traffic, even standing in line at the store. The book says we should think of this time as a chance to be productive, not just wasted time.
I love that. And they call it microproductivity. The authors say that even 5 minutes of focused review can really help us remember things.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So instead of looking at our phones while we wait, we could be quizzing ourselves with flashcards or listening to a language app or even just practicing a presentation in our heads.
Exactly, yeah. Or we could do a quick meditation or some deep breathing. Even just a few minutes of relaxing can really help with stress and focus.
So it's like turning those little annoying moments into a mini retreat. Okay, I'm definitely trying that. Now let's talk about procrastination. I'm a recovering procrastinator, so this chapter in the book really hit home for me.
I think we all procrastinate sometimes, right? The book talks about some of the reasons why we put things off. Fear of failing or wanting everything to be perfect or just feeling overwhelmed by the task.
For me, it's usually all of those things, yeah. And breaking things down into smaller steps helps, but sometimes even that feels like too much.
Yeah. One thing the book says is to focus on how good it will feel when you're done with the task. Instead of thinking about how hard it is or how you might fail, think about how good it'll feel to have it off your plate.
That's interesting, like shifting the focus from the struggle to the reward.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're tricking your brain into wanting to get started.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also noticed that giving myself little rewards along the way can be motivating too. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Rewards are a great way to keep yourself going. Maybe it's a cup of coffee after you finish a hard part of a project or taking a break to listen to your favorite podcast. The point is to find what works for you.
I like that. Find what works for you. Okay, I'm already feeling more motivated. Let's move on. Let's talk about something that's so important for being productive. Making time for thinking. And I don't mean just doing things, but deep thinking that leads to aha moments and creativity.
Right. It's a really important difference. The authors say that we are so busy and connected all the time that we forget to stop and think. But our best ideas often come when we're quiet and thinking.
So we're too busy reacting to things to think about the bigger picture.
Yeah. And the book actually gives a 4-step process to help us have those creative breakthroughs. So you want to hear it?
Oh, yeah. Tell me.
Okay. Well, the first step is to clearly define the problem you're trying to solve.
So be specific about what you're trying to do.
Right. Then the next step is what they call let it go. This doesn't mean give up, but just stop trying so hard to figure it out right now. Let your subconscious work on it for a bit.
Like stepping away from a painting to get a fresh perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so step 3 is just pay attention to the world around you. Inspiration can come from anywhere, conversations, nature, books, anything. The key is to expose yourself to different things and see what sparks your interest.
So be open to new ideas and connections. Got it. What's the last step?
Okay, step 4 is to just play around with different possibilities. Brainstorm, experiment, try new things. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's usually when the magic happens.
The book actually gives a great example of that, the invention of Post-it notes. It came from a failed experiment. The guy who invented the adhesive, it wasn't strong enough for what he wanted to use it for. And then years later, someone else had the idea to use it for temporary bookmarks, and, well, the rest is history.
That's a perfect example, right? A random connection or a new way of looking at something can lead to something amazing. A lot of times we get those aha moments when we aren't even trying to solve a problem.
That's interesting. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of our deep dive. Let's think about something important. Our values. The book asks this big question. It says, does the way you spend your time reflect your core values?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's easy to get so caught up in all the things we have to do every day that we forget what's really important to us.
Like we're on autopilot just reacting to things instead of really living our lives.
Yeah. And the book says one of the best ways to get control of our time is to make sure what we do actually matches our values. So I want to ask you, if you think about your top 3 priorities, are you giving them enough time?
That's a really good question. I think I'm doing pretty well in some areas, but I could definitely do better in others.
Well, the book is a really helpful framework for doing that. Do you want to hear about it?
Yes, definitely.
So they say to start by defining our values in terms of actions. It's not enough to say, oh, family's important. We need to figure out what that looks like, like what does quality family time actually look like for you? Maybe it's dinner together every night, reading to your kids, going for walks on the weekend.
Yeah, like turning those values into things you actually do, not just ideas.
Exactly. And once you know what those actions are, they say to put them in your schedule just like you would a meeting or appointment.
Oh, I like that. Like actually making a choice to prioritize those
Right.
things. And that reminds me of what we were talking about before with saying no. Like if you know what your values are, it's easier to say no to things that don't fit, even if they seem important at the time.
Right, for sure. And it's okay if you don't get it perfect all at once. It's a
Yeah.
process, right? There will be times when you slip up, but just keep trying to get back on track.
Progress, not perfection. I like that. One of the things that really made me think from this book was the idea that maybe we shouldn't try to manage time, but manage ourselves within the time we have. What do you think about that?
That's interesting. I think it makes sense, though, because we all have the same amount of time, right? 24 hours. It's how we use that time that matters. And that means managing our energy, our focus, our emotions, our habits.
Like we're in charge of our own time, like conducting an orchestra. We decide what to play and how fast and how loud.
I love that analogy. And we have to make sure all the parts of the orchestra are working together well.
So to wrap up our time management deep dive, what's the biggest thing that stood out to you?
For me, I really like the idea of using downtime to be productive or even just to relax for a few minutes. Those little bits of time can really add up.
That's a good one. I think for me, it was the idea of making sure our actions match our values. It's easy to forget that when we're busy.
Definitely. And if we do forget, we end up feeling stressed and overwhelmed. But if we try to spend our time on what really matters to us, our lives will be better.
Well said. So to everyone listening, I hope this deep dive gave you some ideas for making every minute count. Remember, you have more control over your time than you might think. You can create a life that's both productive and meaningful.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to try different things and figure out what works best for you. There's no right or wrong way to manage your time. It's about finding what helps you create a life you love.
Exactly. All right, until next time, happy time managing, everyone.